Hmm? Ah!
What I am going to do is give you some tools to help you experience the full range of human emotions. Learning that won't just make you better people. It'll help you diffuse volatile situations in the field. It'll allow you to manage some of your aggression so you won't feel so tired all the time. In short, it'll make you better cops. One of the tools we use is this. It's called a talking stick. I know, it sounds silly, but it works if you give it a chance. It's our contract with each other. Whoever holds this has the freedom to express himself or herself completely, without judgment, within the confines of this room.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Still Slaying, a Buffyverse podcast. I'm Penny.
And I'm Kara. For this episode, we're going to be discussing Angel Season 1, Episode 6, Sense and Sensitivity, written by Tim Minear and directed by James A. Contner.
This episode originally aired on November 9th, 1999, to an audience of 3.7 million, that's higher than recent weeks, households. Some of the alternative titles in other languages for this episode were Nerves on the Surface in Finnish, Reasons and Feelings in French, Confusion of Feelings in German, and The Control of Aggressiveness in Italian.
Some very interesting translations.
Yeah, I mean, I get that the sort of joke about sense and sensibility, sense and sensitivity, wouldn't work in other languages necessarily, but I just the way that all these translations are so like, just what's the main thing in the episode? Give it away.
Yep. Reasons and Feelings is one of the most like obvious ones. It's like, yep, all right.
Yep, all right, that's what it is.
Tell us exactly what it is. Oh, jeez.
Before we get into our discussion, we want to just alert our listeners that the discussion is going to include some sensitive subjects like police brutality, acts of violence, racism, some other isms. And, if you don't want to listen to that, we get it. Just join us for the next episode. But if you're here for it, that's great. And we'd love to hear your thoughts if you have a response to the things we say tonight.
Yes, always.
So let's start with our favorite 90s flashback of the week.
Oh gosh, my cough is coming out with my laugh. I can't help it. But I kind of had fun picking out my flashback of the week this week. Jeez. I put two, technically.
Okay,
one
that's good.
was sensitivity and empathy being a bad thing. Technically. And then the second was the Nordic track exercise machine that Doyle's informant is on while he's talking to Angel and Doyle. I was like, I feel like I fell asleep and woke up to the infomercial. I love it.
Oh, how many times
so
did I
much.
sleep to that infomercial for Nordic track? Those are both really, really good ones. I forgot to pick a flashback of the week, so I'm gonna just borrow one of yours and tag on to Nordic track.
That's fair. I mean, it deserves to be mentioned twice. It was such a staple.
It really was.
I think we had one actually.
Infomercials. Are there still infomercials?
That's a great question.
I don't have regular TV anymore. I only have streaming.
I mean, I don't know if there are serious infomercials. I haven't watched actual cable in a really long time. I'll have to ask my parents.
Yeah, like there were some great ones in the 90s. There was like the Popeel and the ShamWow
Oh, yeah.
and Jack LaLanne and his juicer, the George Foreman grill, iconic.
Oh, yeah, and the different, like, CD soundtracks.
Oh
That
yeah,
there are a
yeah,
couple of songs that instantly transport me to waking up at, like, 2 a.m. on the couch after having fallen asleep on a Friday night or something.
yep. The way they would
Oh,
like scroll
man.
the list of titles of the songs, and you'd be like, wait,
Yes.
it's going too fast for me to read all of them. I thought we would start kind of where the episode starts with Cordelia calling Angel out on being kind of a rude boss.
Does giant tentacle spew come out with dry cleaning?
Oh, good, you're back. Cordelia, you need to...
No. I don't care what horrible thing's about to happen. Asteroids are hurtling towards Earth. Unspeakable evil is rising in the San Fernando Valley. Jar Jar is getting his own talk show. Whatever. I don't want to hear about it. Not until you ask us how it went.
Call your mother back. She phoned saying she'd like to speak with you. And what are you talking about?
You do remember leaving us in a sewer with a giant calamari?
Yeah? And you're both here. So I assume it went okay, right?
Yeah, it went okay. Of course it went okay. Okay? That's not the point.
So there is a point.
Being that it is possible to brood and show a little interest in the feelings of others.
Oh, she thinks you're insensitive, and not to bring up the irony, but consider the source.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
Doyle gets a little joke at the end there, but she's not wrong. You
No,
know,
she's
ordering
not.
people around, it kind of reminded me of the Elizabeth Moss, John Hamm scene in Mad Men, one of the
Mm.
many, many great scenes in Mad Men, where she's like, you never say thank you. And he's like, that's what the money is for.
Oh my gosh, yes. Goodness gracious.
Uh,
That's a good
but
show.
we've all had bosses, right, who were like, do this, go there, do that, and never
Mhm.
say like thank you or good job or
Yep. It's
anything
like,
like
please,
that.
a little bit of validation, a
It's
little bit of sensitivity. I guess
it's
this is another be
demeaning.
careful. It really is. But this,
Yeah.
I think Buffy and Angel both have a lot of excellent be careful what you wish for type episodes. And this is
Yeah.
absolutely a be careful what you wish for, Cordy
Yeah. Yeah.
episode. Because we know, Angel could use a little sensitivity training. He could stand to be a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah.
And he
He's
definitely
from
gets
another
there.
century. He needs to be modernized. It's not an excuse. It may be an explanation, but, he's had plenty of
No,
time to catch up.
that's true. And I love Cordy calling him out on it because, of course, she would.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, boss, a little appreciation here.
I mean, she
And
is
she got
covered in
covered
goo.
in, yeah, that green gunk as she's sitting there talking to him. It kind of looked like Nickelodeon Slime a
Yeah, a
little
little
bit,
bit.
which sounds much more appealing than giant tentacle spew. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, poor Cordy.
The cold open had that fun moment where she's like talking to Doyle in the tunnel about I don't know how unfair their life is or whatever, and we see in the background she's facing away from Doyle, right? And in the background, this tentacle comes out and grabs Doyle, and she's just yammering away, completely oblivious to the fact that he's now fighting for his life. And I feel like I've seen that on this show so many times, and it
Mm-hmm.
always entertains me.
It's so funny. It's just such a good, and of course, like Cordelia sometimes has some issues with being a little self-centered and a little too focused on herself, and that's just another perfect moment of that. And Doyle
Yeah,
handled it like a champ. He's
yeah.
fine. Totally fine.
They're both fine. They got the job done. And Angel's like, I assumed it went fine. No,
He trusts them. He
yeah.
knows.
But it sets the
Ugh.
audience up to just have the idea of sensitivity to others in the back of our head when we then, move over to the Kate storyline, which really dominates the rest of the episode. There's not really a B plot. It's pretty much all about Kate and
True.
this thing going on at the police department. But,
Oh,
we see
goodness.
her catch some criminal dude and sort of rough him up and he's like there's somebody who's been
Casual
murdered,
police
and they're like,
brutality.
little Tony murdered this guy, and she's like, oh, and he's like, oh, I heard he, committed suicide, and she's like, oh, he shot
Oh,
himself in the
yeah.
back of the head, did he? Like, I,
Yeah, like wrapped in saran wrap. Like, he was depressed.
yeah,
I was like, oh,
all of
jeez.
that sort of sets up little Tony's existence pretty well. There, I feel like they were like, central casting, we need thugs and a mob boss, and they were like, here you go.
Oh, yeah, so stereotypical. But it's like, I have to say, I have to rant for a second. I will rant later in the episode, but this is more of a fun rant.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
when Kate arrests this guy, Spivey, I think is his name, she's, slamming him around and she says, "You have the right to remain silent, but I wouldn't recommend it," as she's starting to read him his Miranda rights. And that was dumb, but it made me laugh. And I was just sitting there thinking, it is one of my biggest pet peeves that TV shows and movies have given people a sincere misunderstanding of Miranda and
Hmm.
when your Miranda rights are to be read. Because we have, I had to explain this in jury selection repeatedly because everybody thinks that you are read your rights when you're arrested. And for our listeners who have not been arrested, that's not true. You do not have to be read your rights unless the police have you, one, in custody, and two, they are actively interrogating you. And this every time I see it on TV, it makes me cringe a little. And that is very nitpicky and
I
lawyer
didn't
nitpicky on
know.
top of that.
I didn't know that they had to be actively interrogating you, because there's a lot
Mhm.
of casual
Mhm.
interaction between custody and formal interrogation
Oh yeah.
where they could get you to say something incriminating.
Absolutely. And there's countless cases over the years that go into very specific details about, what is custody. Being in handcuffs does not necessarily mean you're in custody. Like there are so many different specific details that kind of need to be in order for it to count as being in custody, for them to even count as interrogating you, because asking questions is a pretty big sign of interrogation, obviously. But if you're in custody and in the back of the police car and you just start talking and the police officer responds to you and you have prompted the conversation and he says, "Well, why did you drink that much anyway?"
Not
That's perfectly
interrogation.
fine. So it drives me crazy because there are so many people that watch TV shows and movies that think, "Oh, if they did not Mirandize me when I'm arrested, my case gets thrown out." And it's like,
Yeah,
"No,
it's not
no.
that easy.
No, that is not how that works." And we don't have time to go into the specifics of Miranda, but just so you know, that's not a thing. They do not have to read you your rights when you are arrested. They don't even have to tell you what you're being charged with.
Yeah.
So
I took
just don't
I never
talk.
practiced criminal law, but I did take criminal law and criminal procedure and constitutional law in law school, like most people. And
Mhm.
the things I learned were horrifying about all the ways that we are not protected by the Fourth Amendment according to our court
Yep.
system, where they've decided
Oh,
that,
yeah.
you know, cops can lie to you and trick you and threaten you with violence as long as they don't actually go through with it,
Mhm.
and all these things that they're allowed to do to get you to talk. We a
Mhm.
couple episodes ago we talked about torture and how media often
Oh,
depicts torture as being highly effective, and that's incorrect.
awful.
They
So wrong.
also depict a lot of things about the justice system very incorrectly, and one of them is this Mirandizing thing, and
Mhm.
another thing is the sort of glamorization of police violence. In any show or movie where the police are good guys hunting bad guys, like in this case where like little Tony is a bad guy and Angel and Kate are trying to catch him, and it's like the morals are fairly straightforward there. you
Mhm.
know, we the audience are supposed to be like, yeah, punch him, Angel, and like we're supposed to think that it's, good that Kate roughs up that guy to get information about little Tony, and it's made to be glamorous. Last week I
Yep.
talked a little bit about how, because a lot of the villains on these shows are non-humans, we can enjoy the violence, right? Like we can enjoy watching Angel kill a demon because it's
Yeah.
not a human, and they're supernaturally evil, so they need to be killed. It's the only way to deal with them. And this little Tony is human. He's very human.
Very.
And it raises a lot of moral issues that the show just breezes right past. They're just
Oh
like,
yeah.
bad guy, whatever.
It made me kind of uncomfortable. Like it has been a long time since I saw this episode. It was certainly before I went to law school the last time I watched it.
It's
And
not one that I go back to or
no.
rewatch.
Well, and seeing her throw him around and beat him up, I was just like, what the hell are you doing? Because one, like, I will tell you, obviously, I can only speak to the cases that I handled from the law enforcement agencies that I'm familiar with. But one time during a interview, I saw a police officer get physical with a suspect and he was fired and charged criminally.
That's
It
amazing,
it
because
it yes.
in my social circles, the assumption is cops all protect each other and they never get in trouble when they do bad stuff.
And I mean, we had a fairly tense relationship after a while under the DA that I primarily practiced under, because she charged police officers multiple times in situations where she believed it to be necessary. She took it to the grand jury and they indicted them, and we had a fairly tense relationship with law enforcement. And it's difficult, but it's it's one of those things that I think the public doesn't realize. How do I want to say this? I don't know. I will say our departments that we worked with, that we received cases from, had mandatory body cameras on at all times. There were very strict rules in place as to when they could mute their microphones on their body cameras. Every single patrol vehicle was equipped with a dash cam recording, from the front, and a camera inside the vehicle recording the back seat where the suspects were held. So there was a lot of accountability there, and there were multiple instances where somebody behaved badly, an officer went a little too far, and I am happy to report that at least in our area, in our county, they were held accountable every time that I was made aware of it. I know that there were some prosecutors that had to kind of fight to get body camera videos in situations, and wouldn't you know, those body cam videos had something that maybe they didn't want us to see. But there are checks and balances, and this is how it is supposed to work. They're not supposed to be able to beat suspects up in interview rooms. It's not supposed to be normalized. And there are situations today, actually, it, as it happens, is the 6th anniversary of one of my friends who was a police officer that was killed in action. And after that, I watched his friends and his fellow officers deal with the individual who killed him and handle him very well. No violence, no voices being raised, and I know how difficult it was for them. And that kind of treatment is necessary. Like, I don't care what you've done. Police officers don't need to have the ability to beat you senseless and get away with it. That's not how we're supposed to operate here. And it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about, having come from working as a prosecutor. But this episode, I gotta tell you, it pushed all sorts of buttons while I was watching it. From Kate beating up various, individuals, including little Tony, even though he was an ass to her. And little Tony coming back trying to, let's go kill us a lady cop and shooting the security guard when he was in custody and pointing a shotgun at Kate and Angel. Like there was all sorts of stuff being triggered in me that I
Yeah.
didn't anticipate.
I'm sorry because I know how hard that can be, and I know that you lost a friend, and that's brutal. I appreciate you telling us about it because I think people need to know these things. And I know that I'm I live in a lefty bubble, right? And the
Mhm.
stories and the beliefs of most of the people that I socialize with on a regular basis are very anti-cop these days.
Yeah.
The sort of horrible Blue Lives Matter backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement has
Ugh.
really ruined a lot of goodwill that people I know have had towards the police.
Oh yeah.
And the media loves to sensationalize certain stories. They never tell the story of the cop who was held accountable. I've never seen that on a news show,
I
but I've
know.
seen a lot of news reports about cops that did something horrible in one jurisdiction and then just like moved 2 counties over and got another cop job.
Mhm.
And
But
so that's the prevailing belief in my social circle. And I think the other side probably has a different prevailing belief that's equally wrong, and that somewhere in the
yeah.
middle is the truth.
It's interesting because, every officer that I knew even casually, and I mean like on social media, seeing their posts when George Floyd happened, they were the first people I saw popping up on my feed condemning it and calling it out for what it was, which was murder.
That's
You
great.
know, it was reassuring to see too, and I was like, "Okay, I know, you guys can stay. You can stay on my friends list." But
Yeah.
it is a really difficult and complex topic. It's a heated topic, understandably so. And, you know, Angel was not prepared. I say Angel as the show, the entity, was not prepared to handle this topic. They didn't have a conversation about it, which seems absolutely insane to me because this is LAPD in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And they I don't, it just seems so tone deaf to me. And I enjoyed this episode to a certain extent. Like there were aspects of it that I found amusing and that I thought were interesting, but overall, I was just like, "How the hell did this get made? Like,
Yeah.
why did they think it would be a good idea?"
I feel like even 2 or 3 years later, there would have been a police violence consultant on the episode to talk about real life, and there would have been a content warning up top, and there's so many things this that date this episode. It's very dated. It deals with an incredibly complicated and difficult subject in a lighthearted way,
Mhm.
and very frustratingly, it talks about sensitivity training like it's a joke. And I think a lot of people already think that things like that are a joke, that it's like, oh, you just get in a circle and bang a drum and
Yeah.
talk about your feelings. And when maybe the title sensitivity training isn't the way to title it, I don't know. But I
Yeah.
myself have had to give sensitivity trainings in a corporate setting.
Mm,
And I think that there are a lot of wonderful things to be gained from it. Just being aware of people who live their lives in a different way from you and therefore might not respond the way you want them to in a situation makes
right.
you better at your job. It makes you a better human being, but
Mhm.
some people don't care about being a better human being. But like, just
It's
and
true.
it's not all like, tell me about your childhood and cry because, your parents weren't nice to you. It's also like, you should know that a person who is, autistic may not be able to follow your instructions when you're arresting them. And so, you need this or
Exactly.
that. Or it's including like a mental health specialist on teams that respond to psychiatric calls. It's knowing about the culture in like an ethnic neighborhood that the police are going into so that they know how to not terrify people and how
Yeah.
to actually ask questions that will get answers. There's so many things that go into this kind of training that making a joke of it is frustrating. And
It
making
is
it into like, let's
frustrating.
just deal with your problems with your childhood. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
when
think
he
that should be something you talk about at work with your colleagues. I feel
no.
like the training should be, I mean, obviously this guy was like an evil warlock or something, but like the
Yeah.
training should be about things specific to your job, like how to be sensitive with scenarios that come up in your workplace, whether that's as a police officer, a firefighter, a
Yeah.
marketing department, sales department, all those things. And this was like group therapy that all of these cops were forced into in
Yeah.
a room together. I was like, if I was sat down in a room with my colleagues from like my last company and
Oh
they were like,
god.
tell me about your mother, I'd be like,
I'd
that's none
rather
of your
not.
business.
Yep. Like
Like,
poor Heath talking about
yeah,
his 6 brothers, and Kate makes that joke like about his mom and how he had wanted to marry his mom, and I was like,
yeah,
this is what TV seems to think sensitivity training is. Like you all have the sharing stick and go
yeah.
around sharing about your innermost thoughts about your childhood. And that was just kind of irritating. And
It
they
was
had to go to
offensive.
sensitivity training because she, you know, beat this guy up in his interrogation. I was like, so the whole department has to go to sensitivity training for this, which is kind of worthless if all they're going to do is sit there and talk about their childhood trauma with each
Yeah.
other. I was like,
That's,
that's
I
not
mean, that's
important.
great. You need to
Well, I
talk
say
about that,
important, but
but
not
not
for
in
the
this setting.
purpose of what you need. I was like, yes, you should all be a bit more sensitive, and
But
you
what they
should
need
not brutalize suspects in custody.
Yeah, what they
But
need is de-escalation training
yes,
and how to restrain a suspect without using violence. And like, it's not about talking about
ugh,
your childhood. That's great. Go to a
yep.
therapist and talk about your childhood. Like, do it. That's
But
going to
and
help
that's
you, but not with your colleagues. That's just
right.
going to make everything so uncomfortable. Think about how uncomfortable that workplace is going to be after this
Oh my
episode when
gosh,
they're all like,
they've all
his
shared
marriage is a
all of these.
mess. Her dad never loved
Yep.
her. Like,
Well,
that
it's like
guy says he
Heath
loves
is
Kate.
also deeply in love with Kate, apparently,
Yeah,
and or maybe that wasn't Heath. That was
or
the other
whatever
guy.
that other guy's name. Yeah.
Yep. But it's like I just don't really understand the message behind that episode because it seems to mock this idea of sensitivity trading, which okay, so are we supposed to see this like kind of hard ass, hard line cynicism that Kate's father has as better?
Like the goal.
Because yeah, I was like, because that's not great either. Like that type of brutality is what got them into this position in the first place, and we don't want to
Yeah.
glorify that. So what is the message? And I guess part of it, this might be a good segue to the title of the episode
Hmm.
and the idea that, it's a intentional play on the Jane Austen novel from 1811, Sense and Sensibility, which is one of my favorite Jane Austen books. I read it so much in high school. Well,
I've
it's
never
if
read
you
it.
it's worth giving a I like it better than Pride and Prejudice, which I think gets all the attention. I think Sense and Sensibility is a better book than Pride and Prejudice. But the idea of it, the theme of the book, the overarching theme is kind of this balance between reason and emotion, or, sense and sensibility, and how you need to balance rational thinking with your emotional expression in order to, really be happy and well-rounded. And there's coverage on, the dangers of impulsive decision making based on being passionate or having passion for something as opposed to carefully considering how you're going to act. And that's kind of represented by these contrasting personalities between the two sisters, Eleanor, who represents sense, and then Marianne, who represents sensibility. And there's also this notion of the consequences of misinterpretations between people in a relationship and what you maybe choose to share and what you choose to hold back. And that leads to a lot of conflict throughout the novel. And we kind of see that here in the episode. There's this notion that sensitivity taken to its extreme has a lot of negative consequences. Kate almost gets killed because of sensitive Angel's refusal to be violent when we need him to. It's like, come on, defender, you can do it. Like, now
Yeah.
is the time. He's overthinking it. He's being too sensitive. And then, the officer that releases all of these dangerous criminals back out onto the street because he's just so overcome now with these feelings. And, the one where he's sitting there, like, I don't think you're really listening to your mugger's feelings. Like, I
Yeah,
don't think
that
you're
was
really
hilarious.
hearing them. Like, it's clear that to the extreme, when you take sensitivity to the extreme, that it's supposed to be a negative thing. You're not supposed to allow sensitivity to override, logic and reasoning. But at the same time, I'm just like, okay, so what's the answer? Because we don't really get to see anybody acting in a way that is measured with logic and reasoning. We see where it's taken to the other extreme, like Kate at the beginning being brutal with this suspect, and her dad completely discounting her feelings that are very valid and
And
kind
also,
of
not just
tragic.
discounting them, being like, "You better never talk to me about that again." Like,
Right?
he's
You embarrassed
angry
me in
about it.
front of the guys? I was just like, "Oh, hell no." I'm like, "That
Yeah.
is so cruel." She was begging for him to, like, see her, truly see her, and recognize her feelings, and he's just like, "You embarrassed me in front of the guys." I was like, "Man, what a
Yeah.
jackass."
He's such
But
a
it's just
throwback cop, right? He's like the stereotype of a bygone era, but honestly, I don't
yeah.
see the new crop of cops being all that much better until
No.
they get the whammy put on them by the
Yeah.
sensitivity guy. And and then, like you said, they swing way too far in the other direction. We don't have a model of, like, this is what it should be like, because Angel's
Nothing.
violent too. He's even our
Yeah.
hero or anti-hero or whatever he is like a punch first, ask questions later guy.
Mhm.
So,
His
you're
parents
right, there's
tasted like
no
chicken. I was like, "Oh, Angel. Oh, alright."
there are moments in the episode, like individual moments that I really like. I think that Kate's monologue at the bar to her father about her childhood and losing her mother was incredibly moving, and her performance of it was fantastic. Like the part where she talked about, like, and you couldn't even look at me anymore because it was her face, like,
Oh,
that hit me hard. I was like, oh, that must
brutal.
happen so often too, to, like, kids that look like the deceased spouse. Like, that's
I can't
awful.
imagine.
And this is a little girl who also lost her mother, dude. Like, yeah, you lost your wife, but your daughter lost her mother. Like,
Yeah.
um, it's so painful. But then there's a part of me that's like, oh, here's the JW world with another, like,
Yep.
tropey daddy issues character. And,
Yep.
and it makes her, it's supposed to soften her. It's supposed to make us like Kate, that she has daddy issues, because, like, she's too pretty and she's too good at her job. People are going to hate her, which a lot of fans hate her.
Yeah.
So we have to give her a vulnerability, and because she's a cop, it can't be clumsiness. That's usually the vulnerability that they like to give women. But
Yeah.
so they give her,
Clumsy and having a firearm is a bad combination.
yeah, that would be tragic.
Oh
But
gosh.
so they give her the daddy issues to soften up her character, and it's very frustrating. There
I
were a
also
lot of moments
feel
in this episode where I was like, Elizabeth Rom is so pretty.
I
Like,
know.
she's so
Especially
pretty.
she's one of those pretty criers. Like
Yeah.
whenever tears would start to well up, I was like, wow,
All
she's
it did was make her
beautiful.
eyes sparkly. I was
Yep.
like, "How are you so pretty?" I think she also was doing something interesting with her face. In the scenes where she's, like, really overcome with sensitivity, she had a
Mhm.
softer affect overall. She just looked, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe they did her makeup differently or something, but she looked softer and more
Mhm.
approachable, and it was a physical difference and not just an attitudinal difference. It
She
was
wasn't
interesting.
pursing her lips as much. I feel like her
Or, like,
character.
clenching her jaw. I feel like she
Yeah.
clenches her jaw a lot. And she also
That's true,
wasn't,
especially
like,
talking to Angel.
yeah. She also, they showed her in a lot of those scenes, she was seated or shot from slightly above, and
Mhm.
in the scenes where she's being a tough cop, she's often shot from slightly below and given stature,
That's
and she's
true.
standing. So there's a visual difference that really makes a difference in the way you perceive the character, and it's only after
Yeah.
watching an episode 3 times that I'm like, "Ah, the
Yeah.
camera!"
It's like,
and I
there
see it.
you
So
go.
if you all didn't notice that, don't feel bad. Like, I
That is
was a
true.
film major and I still have to watch the episode 3 times to notice stuff like that. But
But I almost feel like it was like we hadn't earned that with Kate yet in a way. I get that them revealing this aspect of her character, this history with her mom dying and, her father kind of closing her off afterwards is supposed to endear us to her. We're supposed to get to know her more, but I almost felt I don't know, and the fact that she was standing and telling everybody this in a crowded bar, it almost made me uncomfortable, like I was listening to someone I just met share
yeah,
these intimate details. I was
I
just like,
think it
"Oh,
was
Kate."
supposed to make you a little uncomfortable. Be like, "Whoa, oversharing, like, what's happening?" I think you were supposed to
Yeah,
have a little bit of that reaction. One
which
thing
makes
I do think
sense.
they're doing in season 1 of Angel is really, I think the intention was for a romance between Kate and Angel, and they're pushing it hard, and I think that, you know, the fans pushed back and were like, "We're not buying it. We don't want them together." Like,
Yeah,
but in season 1, they were still really pushing it. So, like, they have Kate
yeah.
basically ask Angel out on a date, and
And tell him she had already pictured him in his underwear, basically,
yeah.
when I was just like, "Damn, alright."
I was like, "Yeah,
And
we all have pictured him in his underwear, but you don't say it."
I know, it's like, "Don't tell him that."
We all saw it
Like,
last week.
jeez.
If
He's all
only you'd been there,
sweaty.
Kate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Too bad." But I do think it's too soon. I feel like a lot of the ways that Angel is behaving in this first season are directly attributed to his loss of Buffy and
Yeah.
how he is still navigating that, and obviously, he's not done interacting with her. Like, they are still not completely separated from one another. There's not been any real closure as of yet. And we see him closing himself off, right? Like there's a lot that's implied, if not outright stated, that he is being closed off, and even more so with Cordelia and Doyle and Kate because of what happened the last time he allowed himself to be open and have those human connections and feelings with
Yeah.
another individual. So I can see why people maybe didn't react to Kate all that well when she was first presented as a possible romantic interest with Angel. But I like Kate. I know a lot of people don't like Kate as a character. I think Sam has made it fairly evident that she is not a huge fan of Kate. And I 100% understand that, but I don't know, there's just
I
something
always liked her
about
too.
her, Like,
I think
she's
I like Elizabeth
headstrong,
Rome.
yeah, that's probably it too. And she does a good job, like, in this, when she talks about her friend's mom who smelled like macaroni and cheese, like,
Yeah.
holding her, I was like, "Damn, that is moving." Like, that conjures up such an image, and she does a really beautiful job, I think, landing those lines and making you feel something. That it is kind of a shame to me that, spoiler alert, we don't get a ton of Kate after the
Yeah.
first season. And I don't know. I did enjoy learning more about her in this episode. I like seeing that she's, she's empowered, she's tough, she's stubborn, and yeah, she has daddy issues like so many other strong female characters in the Whedonverse, but I think it does humanize her. Whether I like the way they chose to do it or not, that's the impact that you feel. And I
Yeah.
think she and David Boreanaz actually have some really good chemistry. There's something palpable between them. And I think she does a really good job playing that through her body language with him. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I enjoy watching them on screen together. I wish
I
we got
mean,
a little bit more.
she does have a lot of the qualities you would look for in a partner for Angel. She's strong
Mm,
in her own right. So she's not
mm,
going to fall into the like, oh, save me trap with him, even though he has saved her in the past. Like she is capable, she's smart, she's strong, and she's beautiful. And, all these things seem like they would be a good match, but there is a rushing it quality that is
yeah.
hard to swallow. Like, I feel like if we had gotten this information about Kate like 3 or 4 episodes later, it would feel more
Yeah,
natural.
I
Um,
agree.
but I know why they did it the way they did because there's stuff that's going to happen later in the
Yeah.
season, and what I get the
Um,
storytelling choices, but it just didn't really land for
mm.
me.
Well, and then it ends on such a depressing note, like we talked about with her dad being like, "Never do that again. Like, you
Yeah,
embarrassed me. I'm gonna pretend like it never happened." And I was like, "Damn." Yeah.
he's
So
he is mean. I mean,
mean, and he's never told her she's pretty. That
yeah,
line too, I was just like, "That's so sad." Like, she just wants to feel connected with her dad. Hello, she became a cop to get close to him, basically.
yeah. Everything she's done in her whole life has basically been to get her dad's approval, and
Ugh.
the story that this paints is that when her mother died, her dad was like, "All right, the emotional part of my life is gone forever. I'm done with that. I'm just a cop now." And Kate basically raised herself and, found some love at her neighbors, but she's always missed her father's love. We don't know what he was like before the mother died, right? Whether or not he was
Yeah,
more loving or if like the mother was just the loving one, and
true.
and he didn't step in to fill the void. But it's and Kate doesn't have any siblings apparently, so she was all alone. It's a sad, sad story.
It's really sad. And
It's really
I
sad.
think that's part of what just makes this episode not entirely land with me is that there's a lot of back and forth between these really heavy or intensely violent or, depressing moments and then moments of intense levity. I don't know if
Yeah.
intense levity even makes sense as a phrase, but we're supposed to be laughing 1 minute and then the next minute
People
we're
getting
hit
shot.
with,
Yeah.
yeah, like humans getting like the human violence, human on human violence when Tony is breaking out and shoots that cop. I was just like, okay, here we are. Like, and it's just so intense. And then you have Angel, in his little Hawaiian shirt and fedora. What
Which
was his name
did he
again?
have that in his car? Like,
I know,
what was
where did
that?
he get
Uh,
it?
Herb Saunders from Baltimore.
That's right.
I mean, he
That was
does a great job about this. We were talking about this before we started recording, but I think David Boreanaz loves these moments. I think he is so happy to be being kind of goofy. And I have been binging old episodes of Bones lately, which is, of course, where David Boreanaz went after this show. And there are
so
episodes on
good.
Bones where he gets to go undercover and he acts like kind of a fool. And it just seems to me like it's David Boreanaz's favorite day at work. Like he just
Mhm.
seems to be
It's like
having such a
he
good time.
lights up. He comes
Yeah.
alive.
He's so
It's just
silly. And most of the time Angel has to be like broody and depressed
yeah.
and or like angry or like righteous. And then these moments where he gets to be silly, it just seems like such a joy. It's weird in this episode, but
That's true. But
Yeah.
Sensitive Angel is what makes this episode worth watching to me.
Yeah.
He does such a good job with it. And we haven't, later on in this show, we get to see more of Angel's sense of humor. We get to see him humanized a bit. But so far, we have not seen very much of that. So getting to watch it in this episode is kind of a treat. Like, I think my favorite part of the episode hands down is when Angel has, become infected with sensitivity from the talking stick, and Cordy and Doyle are trying to get him to like vamp out and
Okay, I've got
fight.
the clip.
Yes.
What are you two? It's Kate. We followed her here.
She's totally lost it. She looked like she's ready to do some damage.
And it's not just her by the looks of things.
The whole place is going nuts. This is so not good.
Okay, I think someone needs a hug.
Okay. Ew. Ew.
Ew. Their facial expressions when he's like, somebody needs a hug, they are horrified. And he's like, you both withdraw when I go.
Okay, I've got that too.
Yes.
He uses it as a talisman. Anyone who handles it becomes infected. He admitted it to me after I threatened him with physical violence.
What's his trip?
Wolfram and Hart, the firm, hired this guy to neutralize the police, so little Tony can make his escape. It'll wear off.
Soon?
So there was never any contract on Detective Lockley.
Little Tony's plan all along was to kill her himself. Poor guy.
Poor guy?
Oh, he's got issues.
Angel, man, you gotta snap out of this.
Right now, it's time for you to get all vampy. Grr! Kate needs you.
I don't want to. You both withdraw when I go vamp. I feel you judge me.
We won't judge you, will we? Give it a try.
Closeness is too important to me right now.
Oh my God. It's so, I feel you judge me. It's so good. And when he says
so
like
funny.
The look on his face when he talks about threatening him with physical violence is he's just so disgusted with himself for doing it. He plays it perfectly. And that just, it kills me. That is
It's
by
brilliant.
far my favorite part of the episode.
Brilliant acting. The rest of the episode, but the scenes where Angel is being sensitive are so funny. And I'm like, oh, I hope that this version of Angel doesn't think about the past at all, because if you're upset about threatening one person with violence,
I know
you're gonna be really upset when you look to the past.
Yeah, it's like, oh, don't let him start to dwell, because that could go really, really badly for everyone.
Don't remind him what he did to Jenny Calendar.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, it's like, nope. I really enjoy the exchange between little Tony and Benny as they're sitting, waiting for the boat for little Tony to escape. And he tells him, don't forget to water my plants. And he's like, and talk to them. They like that. It's kind of adorable.
That's right up there with the Nordic track guy being like, oh yeah, we're all in a spin class together.
Oh yeah. It's so cute. Little things like that. I was like, this is fantastic. That's fantastic.
That is a really great moment. And then Doyle's like, what do you get, like a special thug rate? And he's like, no, but I get a discount if I bring in new members. It's like, I mean, gangsters need to exercise also. Like,
you want to be in shape. Like, it's fine.
It made me momentarily try to picture the cast of The Sopranos at the gym, in like gym clothes and like, using the Nautilus machines and, jogging on a treadmill. It's just
fantastic.
Ridiculous.
I mean, they all wore tracksuits half the time anyway.
Yeah.
Might as well put them to use. But
they never went to a gym, like, unless it was a boxing gym.
That's true. That would be manly enough for them to do together.
Only boxing or like
that's kind of
hunting.
where my enjoyment of the episode ends almost, because I was distracted the entire time by thinking about LAPD in the 90s and police brutality in general in the 90s. And I mean, it was tone deaf back then,
And
I
it's
think.
so hard to watch now.
Oh, yeah, like, I watched it twice, and I didn't even really laugh that much the first time, even when I enjoyed, like, angel moments, because I was just so uncomfortable. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is not good." Oh gosh, and
There is going to be another episode that deals with the topic
mm,
of police brutality. It's in season 3 maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, I think no, maybe
Yeah,
it's next
there's been
season.
2, I think it might be next season,
It
I'm
might be
gonna
next
The
season,
Thin
and it's
Deadline,
yeah, the
right?
thin deadline. That is a
Yeah, it's
superior
next season.
treatment of the subject. Now, I haven't seen it
Yes.
in many, many years, but in my memory, it is a a more
Well, it feels like they were actually offering up valuable and
yeah,
valid commentary on an issue with that
and
episode.
based in real life truths about the relationship between the LAPD and black
Yes,
citizens of Los Angeles. So, all right, that's
they
a spoiler.
acknowledged
We're
it.
not going to go into. We're not going to talk about a different episode, but just it is coming, and I wonder sometimes if they got some backlash to this episode, and they were like, "All right, we'll go back to that subject in season 2 and see if we can make it
Mm,
better."
it's
It also helps that there's actually a black character on the show in season 2. Like,
Yes,
there's
I
things
love
that help.
that.
Before we get really into the police brutality conversation, I just want to point
Yeah.
out a couple of other ways that this episode doesn't hold up. There's tons of fat phobia
Oh,
that
yeah.
really it's just it's so dated, and it just brought me mentally back to this time in the late 90s when it was like ultra low rise jeans and
Mhm.
tops held on by like pieces of string, and everybody was so skinny and heroin chic and all that garbage that was like,
Yep.
before there was any real awareness of what that was doing to young
Oh
women and
gosh,
girls,
yes.
and the health, like eating disorders were still like a niche topic. People didn't really know that much
Yeah.
about it. There were a lot of stereotypes. I don't know. The late 90s was a horrible time for fat phobia.
Oh, yeah.
There was homophobia, like Kate
Yep.
in the sensitivity meeting making the joke about Heath, and then there's this
And her dad saying to Angel, like, how he was so glad that Kate showed up with a guy because he thought
yeah, I
he
was
was.
afraid she was gay. Like, you
Yeah,
don't care about her. Why do you care if she's gay?
yeah.
But
It's like, come on, man.
like that's the worst thing that would happen is to have a daughter who's
Mhm.
a lesbian. Like, come on.
God forbid. Okay.
She's also like the only woman cop.
Yeah.
Like there's no other women anywhere to be seen in this episode
Mhm.
in the police department or the criminals. Like,
Oh,
anyway.
yeah.
And then the thing that makes me the most crazy, and I have a clip, of course, about this.
You've been running after me for a long time, haven't you, sweetheart? If I'd have known how bad you wanted me, I might have had you catch me a little sooner.
And if I had known how much you needed the exercise, I might have let you run a little longer.
Like, ew.
So
On
there's the fat
both.
phobia at the end, but then, it's a thing that still happens all the time. When
Yeah.
men want to take power away from a woman,
Mhm.
they sexualize her. And it's either you're a whore, or I'm going to rape you, or you're
Yep.
too ugly for me to want to have sex with you. And
Yeah.
it's their go-to. I feel like you're trying to assert power over me in whatever way you are, so I'm going to try to undermine you with sex. And it's like
Yeah.
reducing women to their sexuality. And I'm sure that a woman who was a detective in Los Angeles in the 90s
Yep.
had probably heard this a million times,
Yeah.
and so she just gives back a little bit of outdated fat
Yeah.
phobia when she gets this, and she probably has heard it a million times and it doesn't even bother her anymore, but it made me so
It's
rageful.
gross. It's
It's
gross. Well,
disgusting.
I will say, I think it's pretty realistic. The number of things that I heard people say to, female detectives or female police officers, either on body cams or during interviews, like men said absolutely disgusting, sexist crap all the time. But it is kind of, in a TV show situation like this, it's just kind of exhausting
Yeah.
and tired to hear it
And it
again.
it
And when he
made me
says you got a
realize,
pretty mouth to
yeah, ugh.
her, I was like, "Oh, vomit."
It made
That's
me
not
realize that I'm still hearing this kind of language in TV shows and movies, and
yeah.
it's still happening, and it's part of, rape culture, and
Mhm.
it's on the pyramid of rape culture towards the bottom, right? Words that
Yeah.
don't have any follow through are part of normalizing thinking of women as an object,
Yeah.
and therefore, like making them eligible to be raped. And it's disgusting. And
Yeah.
it's
Well,
what's
even
frustrating is nobody else around them was like, that's disgusting, dude. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah.
I I agree that it's realistic. I'm upset that it's realistic.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant thing. Well, and the other thing with body shaming, we have made some progress societally, I think, but I still see a lot of body shaming when it's directed towards maybe an individual that most of us agree is kind of deplorable. For example, different politicians. I have
Oh yeah.
seen a
I'm
lot
very
of
upset about this.
yes, it drives me
He
crazy.
has said and done, the individual we're both thinking of, he
Yeah.
has said and done numerous things worthy of mockery and hatred.
Mhm.
You don't need to talk about his body.
Yep.
Like, stop it. Because when you say mean things about his body, every person who has any kind of insecurity about their own body
Mhm.
feels it too.
Um,
At least
and
I do.
I'm not immune to that either. Like that feeling where even though I know people, even if it's people that care about me and I know they care about me, like you and I have definitely become close. Like my thyroid issues, my health issues that I've struggled with, and rapid weight gain is one of the side effects of dealing with this autoimmune disease. And so when I hear, close friends or family members make these negative comments about, other people that I don't like about their bodies, I inevitably go to, "Oh, well, what do you think about me?"
And do you say that stuff when I'm not in the room?
Yeah, like, is that what you actually think about me? Like, do you think I'm like, that type of thing, it's inevitable,
Oh, yeah.
and I really want us to be able to progress past that, especially when someone, like you said, does things that are very deserving of criticism, plenty of things you can choose from, and we go so low as to start to criticize what they look like or their
It's
body.
lazy,
Yeah.
right? It's shallow. Like, it's unsubstantive. It's meaningless at the end of the day
Yeah.
because that doesn't change anything about the actions of this reprehensible person. We talked about this a little bit on my other podcast that I'm doing right now for Yellow Jackets WTF, because in season one there were a lot of articles, interviews with the stars, among them Melanie Linsky, and almost every interviewer asked Melanie Linsky something
Ugh.
about her body and talked about
Oh
how
god.
she wasn't as skinny as like Juliette Lewis or Tawny Cypress. And she came out guns a-blazing and like gave the press what for about it.
Love
And
her.
I love that. And we talked about it on season one of the Yellow Jackets podcast. But
Yeah.
this week, there was an interview with the star Simone Kessel, who is, what I would think of as actually a little too thin. She looks a little too thin,
Yeah.
but she's definitely like sort of the standard of beauty that most people would agree with. And there's this article where the interviewer is interviewing her about her role in the show and what she's been doing outside of the show, and takes time in this article to talk about what she's eating for lunch and how she's cutting carbs because she's going to wear a very revealing dress at the premiere of season 3. And I'm like,
Ugh, gosh.
why are we like, you don't see that in articles where they're talking about men or interviewing a man. And
No.
plenty of male actors also have to go on diets because they're going to be like half naked on screen or whatever. There are
Yeah.
a lot of articles about like Chris Hemsworth, how does he get that body? But they're
Yeah.
usually there's a tone difference where the writer is like, he's like a superhuman. Look at what he
Yeah.
goes through. Isn't it amazing? And I know that men have their own body issues that come from seeing those unrealistic bodies and reading those kinds of articles. But
Right.
there is a difference. It's like a power fantasy for men who want to look big and strong. And with women, it's about like, we want you weak, tiny, unable
Mhm.
to defend yourself, and so distracted by trying to fit into these standards of beauty that you don't have time to realize how oppressed you are. And
Yep. Oh, yeah.
ever since I've noticed that, like since I had that education and the wool was removed from my eyes, I can't unsee it. So now
Diet
I'm just
culture
furious.
and the patriarchy go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with women, it's like, take up space.
Yeah.
Don't like, there's this obsession with trying to make yourself smaller. And obviously, it's a problem either way. We don't, if you get too thin, then you get shredded in the media
Yeah.
and in
Or
public opinion. If you get too heavy, you get shredded in the media and
yeah.
in public opinion. It's just like, let people just exist in their bodies. Like, body neutrality,
Yeah.
I
Just
feel
don't
like,
talk
is
about
what we
it.
need to get to.
I
Like, the least
guarantee you,
interesting thing about someone is their body.
and I guarantee you, anybody who has a little more weight on their body than they would like is well aware of it. You
Oh,
don't
yeah.
need to tell them.
Yeah.
There was also a thing that happened this week or at the end of the last week. Millie Bobby Brown went to, I think, the Oscars and like walked the red carpet. And there were all these articles and postings on social media about how she looked too sexy. And she doesn't look like she did in season 1 of Stranger Things, which was like 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like, Lord,
yes,
I hope not. She
she
was a
grew up and
child.
yeah, she came out guns blazing also and was like, "Stop talking about my body. I grew
Yeah.
up in front of the public, but you guys didn't grow with me and let me be a grown up. People don't like to see her being really sexy, and she's a
Yeah.
gorgeous girl, and she's young, and she's being given designer dresses and things from fashion designers to wear to red carpet events. She looks like she's having fun with it. Like,
Yeah.
what is they're like, "Oh, I don't like her makeup. It makes her look old." Like
Oh, yeah.
nitpicking at
Just like, leave
women.
her
You can't, you're
alone.
too pretty, you're too sexy, you're not sexy enough, you're not pretty enough,
Mhm.
you're too big, you're too small. It's not about there's not like one body that they approve of because I've seen
Yeah.
people criticizing Margot Robbie's body. She's perfect.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
they just want to criticize and they want to keep
It's
women off
exhausting.
balance.
Yep.
And it's about power. It's not about how you look, and it's definitely not out of concern
No.
for our health.
No. And
I
Krista
mean,
Carpenter has spoken about this multiple times before too, in her struggles, not unrelated to her treatment uh by
at the hands of
JW. Yep.
JW. Yeah.
So it's always, unfortunately, I feel like this is always going to be a relevant topic, and it's
Yeah.
exhausting, quite
And
frankly.
I I say to women out in the world that this tactic by the patriarchy, and it's not only men that make these comments, by the way. Women
Mm.
enforce this against other women all the time. It only has power if you let it. So I know it hurts. I've been on the receiving end of "you're fat, you're ugly," and I've also been in a room where people are talking about someone else who's fat and been like, "I know they all think I'm fat."
Yep.
And it
Especially when they say that about someone who happens to be smaller than you,
oh, yeah.
and it's just like, "Oh, cool. All right."
And then they're always like fat and lazy, right? They always put those
Yeah.
2 together, and I'm like, "Come on." And they
Uh,
say things assuming the reasons why you're fat. That's another one is like, "Well,
oh,
you
yeah.
you know, you gotta stop eating so much cake." And I'm like, "I haven't had cake in 2 years."
I know.
Like, I
It's
eat
like, I wish I
salad
could
every day.
show you what I eat.
Yeah, like, come on. I'm living on chicken soup here because everything else makes me barf. I'm not like anyway.
Yeah.
So you guys all know how we feel now. That was yeah. So those are other ways I thought the episode was dated, but not because it's like, yeah, all those things are
Yeah,
still alive and well in our society, but
that's true.
media has started moving past it. Like TV shows are starting to be more responsible about not
Yeah.
glamorizing that, not showing that behavior as normal. It's now like only bad guys have those kind of behaviors, and it's a little
That's
different.
true.
There's
People
some
that we
progress.
aren't supposed to have favorable opinions of are the ones who engage in that behavior. But it
Exactly.
is interesting how some of the episodes, both in Buffy and Angel, hold up so well,
Yeah.
and some, like this one, just don't. And I, you know, looking into this episode and preparing for it, it felt irresponsible to not discuss the police brutality aspect of it, at least a little
Yeah.
bit. And if now you think now's a good time,
Yeah, I think
let's
let's get
see.
into the police brutality stuff. And,
I mean,
I reached out to Kara ahead of time and I said, I feel like we have to talk about police brutality. And she's like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
graciously agreed to take the lead on that. And I am very grateful for it because I was buried in the trauma of Yellow Jackets this week.
Yeah. Heavy. Lots of heavy, heavy
Lots of heavy
things.
stuff going on. So let's get into it.
I will say we will link the articles and some helpful encyclopedia entries to different things that I reference if you want to go look it up yourself. There's one main article that I'm focusing on and kind of drawing from that's called The War on Drugs, Policing, and Police Brutality. It's by Hannah Cooper. And it is a great read. I really strongly encourage you to read it if you're at all interested. But she kind of takes this approach of examining the history of policing in general, the war on drugs, police brutality, police and racism, and it is a very well done and thoughtful treatment of the topic, and I really appreciated that. And she kind of starts off with, you know, what even is police brutality? What do we mean when we're talking about police brutality? And she cites the World Health Organization's classification of police brutality as a form of violence. And they recognize 4 different types of violence: physical, sexual, psychological, and neglectful. And it's this interesting, juxtaposition of police officers being empowered to use force and violence to a certain extent in order to, effect arrest or protect themselves or others, and how this has really muddied the waters in terms of policing and how we accept that policing going forward. And for people that may not be aware, the root of formal policing in the United States is essentially from slave owners' efforts to control slaves. It started off as slave patrols being the first state-sponsored police forces, and those patrols essentially consisted of white property-owning men who were charged with preventing slave uprisings and escapes. And those slave patrols were particularly vital to maintaining white control in areas where there were more slaves than white individuals. And so the history of police forces in general is already steeped in racism. And it's going to be a charged topic no matter what. And the war on drugs was initially declared by President Nixon in 1973. And then, of course, President Reagan rededicated the United States to that war on drugs in 1982. And that is kind of the epicenter of modern policing and what we see today. And notably, one thing that this author talked about in particular was arrests for other offenses declining during the years the war on drugs was starting to be the focus, and how racial and ethnic disparities in arrests for drug offenses ended up increasing for drugs in particular, and every other offense they remained static or declined. So it is impossible to talk about the police force and police brutality without talking about race. And what really shocked me watching this episode is just how they don't even acknowledge the reality of the LAPD in the 90s. We talked about Kate and having to go to sensitivity training and everyone kind of mocking it. But I just want to set the tone as to what was going on culturally during the 90s. So I went through and kind of made a timeline of significant law enforcement or police brutality events in the 90s. And keep in mind, this episode aired on November 9th of 1999. So initially, the first incident that I want to focus on is the Rodney King incident. And that was on March 3rd of 1991. And Rodney King was brutally beaten by police officers of LAPD, and that was caught on video. And ultimately, those officers were charged, and at the conclusion of the trial on April 29th, 1992, a jury deliberated for 7 days and acquitted all 4 officers of assault and acquitted 3 out of 4 officers of use of excessive force. And the riots that ensued in Los Angeles are infamous. It lasted a total of 6 days. People were utterly outraged by these acquittals. During the riots, more than 50 people died and over $500 million of property damage occurred. And that kind of set the tone of policing in the 90s. Then August 21st, 1992, we had what become known as the Ruby Ridge standoff, and this was an 11-day standoff with a white supremacist named Randy Weaver, his family, and a friend in an isolated cabin in Idaho. And Weaver's wife and his 14-year-old son were ultimately killed during this siege with U.S. Marshals. A U.S. Marshal lost his life as well. And then you go to the Waco siege on April 19th in 1993, where the FBI launched a tear gas assault on the Branch Davidian compound, which ended what was a 51-day standoff between the federal government and an armed religious cult. And by the end of the day, the compound had been burned to the ground. Some, I think, 80 plus Branch Davidians, including 22 children, had died in the fire. And those 2 incidents, Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege, drew even more attention to the brutality and the violence in our law enforcement. And then in 1996, during that year, over 160 Black churches were burned across the nation. A lot of them were in poor rural areas, and it was particularly devastating as frequently rural Black churches served as centers of community and provided a wide range of social services. And at that point in time, President Bill Clinton stepped in and formed the National Church Arson Task Force to investigate those crimes and protect churches from future incidents. And I think that in particular gives you an idea of the heightened racial tensions in the country. Leading into June 7th of 1998, James Byrd, who's a 49-year-old Black man in Jasper, Texas, was brutally murdered in a hate crime committed by 3 white supremacists. And this drew nationwide anger and outrage. The 2 other incidents on August 9th of 1998, Abner Lima, who was a Haitian American man, was brutally assaulted and sodomized by multiple NYPD officers after he was arrested outside of a nightclub in Brooklyn, again drawing national outrage. December 28th, 1998, 4 white police officers in Riverside, California shot and killed a Black woman named Taisha Miller as she sat in her vehicle with a gun. Her family had called police to assist because they found her unconscious, locked in her car, foaming at the mouth with the engine running with a gun in her lap. And she was shot a total of 23 times. That
Whoa.
That incident sparked protests around the country. Leading up to February 4th of 1999, there were plainclothes officers of NYPD's street crime unit, and they mistakenly identified an unarmed immigrant named Amadou Diallo for a rape suspect. Some reports said for a drug offense suspect, but they fired 41 shots at him after he reached into his pocket for his wallet. That was another killing that absolutely incensed the public. And these are just, the main incidents throughout the 90s that truly sparked outrage and protests. So this is the environment that this episode aired in, and it blows my mind that they didn't acknowledge it in any way, not like a, you know,
Oh, there's an acknowledgement. Somebody makes a joke about Mark Furman, who
oh,
was
yeah.
one of the police who beat
I
Rodney
told
King.
you.
And I
It's
was like, are we
insane.
making light of that now? Like, is this a joke to you? I also think, and of course, we've talked about this a lot, the fact that there's no black people in the entire episode
Yeah.
about LAPD is just wild to me. And it
Yep.
speaks to, I mean, that was a time when our TV shows were segregated, right? There was
Mm,
like white shows and black shows, and there's been a lot of
yeah.
progress about that in recent years. But it it was also a time when a lot of like well-meaning white liberal people were like, "Oh, it's such a difficult subject and it upsets so many people. Let's just not deal with it.
Yeah. It's like, we'll
Let's
just
be
ignore
quiet
it.
about that." And it's not the answer. Sometimes you have to say things that maybe are going to make people mad or bring up uncomfortable subjects or sit in some discomfort to get to
Yeah.
justice, right? You can't avoid your way through the world and still be like expect things to get better. You can't
Yeah.
avoid difficult subjects or painful subjects or divisive subjects and think that you're helping. All you're doing is helping yourself to be more comfortable. It's horrible. I've been in rooms with people who are like,
Wild.
what you're saying is racist, you're privileged, you don't understand. And it sucks to be on the receiving end of that. But you know
Yeah.
what? A lot of times they were right. And I needed to learn the lesson.
Yep.
And it was uncomfortable for me. Nobody ever was violent with me about it, thank God. But like, you have to be willing to absorb a little discomfort. And I don't think that TV shows were willing, right? They were like, we want to reach the maximum
It's true.
white audience. And, at the time, the very firm belief was that 18 to 34-year-old white men were the like best demographic to reach.
Yeah.
So even if a show wasn't aimed at them, they certainly didn't want to anger that demographic and
Yeah.
alienate them. So they were very careful not to point fingers at white men when they really should have been. But
That's the
that's
thing.
because TV networks are corporate and they're driven by profits, not justice.
Yeah.
That's what do you expect?
That's the fact that this episode wasn't just a police force in a big city. It was specifically LAPD, which
Yeah.
has this notoriety for a number of reasons, for a number of different incidents with police brutality and racism. And that's just not touched on at all. Like, that just still does not sit well with me, and
No.
it makes it impossible to really enjoy the episode for me. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are some people out there, I don't know if they would even be listening to us anymore if they think this way, and be like, just so what, like, don't make everything so political, just enjoy it, like, it's just a TV show. And like, nope, sorry. One, art is political in nature, everything is political. And it's like they're going out of their way to ignore it. And
Yeah.
you're right, that Mark Furman joke just makes it even worse. It's like, we know
Because
you
it's like,
know.
yeah, you're
Like,
aware of it. It's not funny. I also don't think those people are listening to us anymore, but if one of them happens to listen to us who thinks like Rodney King had it coming or whatever horrible belief that you have, A, I don't care if we're offending you.
yeah. Ugh.
B, I think that it is a disservice to artists to not explore the themes that they're presenting. I think it's
Yeah.
disrespectful to be like, it's just entertainment. I don't think a
Yeah.
lot of these writers who wrote Buffy and Angel were in that room being like, what we're doing doesn't have any deeper meaning. I think they all think and want to have
Mhm.
deeper meanings. These shows are highly metaphorical, they're very political, they're very feminist for the most part.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're of their time, they lack intersectionality, but
Yeah.
they do push political ideas and society ideas forward. And that's why we're even podcasting about it. If it was
Yeah.
merely entertaining, it wouldn't be worth getting on the computer once a week to talk about.
Yeah. They're thought provoking. The commentary that the episodes offer is still relevant today, which is
Yeah.
funny. I saw, in a couple of I'm in a couple of different Buffy groups on Facebook, and there was one group in particular where people kept posting and complaining about how woke Buffy is and how they hope that the remake isn't woke. And I was like, have you seen the show? Like, where are you thinking that Buffy was not progressive? Buffy was
Yeah.
extremely progressive for its time.
It's
And
like those people who are like, I don't like Rage Against the Machine ever since they
oh
got
my
political.
gosh.
And it's
Yeah,
like, you mean
or
from when they
Green Day.
founded?
Yeah. I was like, what do you think punk music is? Like what are
What
you
machine
talking
do you think
about?
they're raging against?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a lawnmower.
Oh
Like,
gosh. I
yeah, there's
can't.
certain people who just like bend themselves into pretzels in order to avoid seeing messaging that they don't want.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for you that you can enjoy TV on a shallow
On one
level.
level. Yeah.
That's great. You must have a much simpler mental life than I do, but I
Must be nice.
personally like being deep. Like,
Yeah.
it brings me misery sometimes, but I wouldn't want to live in a different way. And anyway, I don't want
Yeah.
to berate our listeners. Um I love you guys, so I'm going to lead with love.
Yep. Yep.
Do you have more on police brutality?
No, I will just say, I think if I don't know what our age range of listeners are, but if we do have listeners out there that are not really familiar with LAPD or the Rodney King case in particular, um, th- we will link. It's called The History of American Police Brutality, and it was an article compiled by the National Trial Lawyers Association that gives a really good overview of the incident and kind of the timeline of policing in the US, that I would recommend reading, because I think it's important, not to sound too dramatic, but in a similar vein as remembering the Holocaust, where bearing witness is important. I think it's incredibly important to educate yourself about different incidents of police brutality in the history of the United States. And it's important that we don't forget that. So I would encourage you to read some of the articles that we will link in the show notes.
And this discussion has been focused primarily on history from the 90s. This is a show from the 90s, but
Right.
police brutality is an incredibly current subject. Militarization of the police is a very current subject, and it's something that every citizen should educate themselves about, whether or not you ever interact with the police, whether or not you agree or disagree that it's an issue. You need to know about it because it's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
I will also
Unfortunately.
say that there is a certain element in Hollywood that just likes the drama of police people beating up other people. And I read this interesting article. There's this BBC show that I loved called Life on Mars. And the premise of the show, the main character is a UK, they're not detectives. What are they called there? Like inspector
And yeah.
something, whatever. The equivalent of a detective, and he gets into like a minor car accident and hits his head and wakes up in the 70s, and he doesn't realize at first that it's the 70s, and he goes to the police station and they're like, hey, the new guy's here, there's your desk. And he starts being a police detective in the 70s, and the there's huge culture shock because of course these 1970s cops are like all about the brutality and the racism in like these wildly blatant ways that he's
Oof.
shocked and horrified by. And I was like, oh, this show is groundbreaking, it's so interesting, look at how it's putting a lens on all this stuff. And then I read this interview with the creators, and they were like, yeah, we wanted to do a cop show where the cops could be violent, and the only way we could do it was if it was time travel. And I was like,
Oh
ew,
my
ew,
gosh.
ew.
Just like, damn it, guys.
Like, you accidentally made this really amazing show.
It's
There's an
funny.
American version of that show that lasted like 6 episodes. It just didn't it didn't work, but the BBC version is really, really good.
And I tend to enjoy the BBC versions of shows much better than the American ones for the most part. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah, part of it I've determined I went through a phase where I was obsessed with BBC shows and I would pick different British actors and like go find all their projects and watch them. And I realized one of the things that I was enjoying so much was that I wasn't as familiar with all of the actors. And so I was having an
Huh.
easier time losing myself in the story because I wasn't like, oh, like when I
I could
watch
see that.
Bones and I'm like, that's Angel as an
Yeah.
FBI agent. There was something about that. But then after about 2 years of this obsession, I was like, oh no, now I know too
You
many of
start to
them. It's the
see,
same.
yeah, it's true. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
Or I'll watch it and be like, oh, that's so and so in Doctor Who. Oh, that's so and so in Harry Potter. It's like it's just
Yeah.
same person over and over. Although I won't complain about seeing David Tennant on my screen too much.
Ever.
I
No.
will watch
Please.
anything with that man.
All the David Tennant. All of it.
Oh
He's
man.
so good and he's so charming. The one other thing I just wanted to like mention is that little Tony, also a fat phobic joke,
Yeah.
he's a human mobster, but he has Wolfram and Hart as his lawyers. And I had completely forgotten about this lawyer, Lee Mercer, that we see in
Oh
this
yeah.
episode. I remember Lila, I remember Lindsay, but I'd forgotten about Lee Mercer. And
Oh
he
Lee.
is the weaseliest. He is he's so fun to watch on TV because the
Yeah.
second you see his like sort of too smooth, too rational delivery of lines, you're like, oh, this guy's a creep. Like you just know he
Yep.
is. And he's so hateable. And there's good stuff that's going to come up later with him. And I'm
Oh
excited to
yeah.
get there. And I had completely forgotten he existed. And I was like, oh my God, he's Lee Mercer's the best.
Weasel is a good description for him. Like when
Yeah.
he is threatening, when he's threatening Kate about, basically exposing the police brutality and putting it in the court of public opinion. I was like, this guy sounds like he may have killed a cop. Like, are people really gonna care? I mean, they should,
Yeah.
but
But like
okay.
even on a scale of police brutality, I don't think anything that Kate did, where she's like throwing those people around or Angel punching people was
Yeah.
acceptable. But
Yeah.
on a scale of public perception of police brutality, this would not register,
No.
right? Like
Especially in
after
the
Rodney
90s.
King,
Like, good
if you haven't
lord.
seen the Rodney King video,
Oh,
first of all, like brace yourself,
yeah,
sit
prepare
down.
yourself.
It's it's horrific, and then knowing that they were all acquitted is very disturbing. So I
Makes
don't
my
think Kate,
stomach
like,
hurt.
throwing some guy up against a wall would be even a blip. Like, I don't
Nah.
think newspapers would cover it. I don't like, that's
Especially
a
in
deep breath.
LA, right?
Unless,
Like,
well, Wolfram and Hart could probably get it covered, right? They have all
that's
kinds of
true.
power, but
They have a
I
lot
also
of
love that
connections.
Wolfram and Hart fires their client. Is like, "Oh,
I
you're too
know.
exposed. Later, dude." And he's all like, "Damn it." And
It's
I was
so
like,
funny.
"Oh, I've fired a client before. It's fun."
Mm.
I mean, I didn't personally get to do it, but it was a client I was on the team of, and we fired that client, and it was very satisfying because we were like, "Oh, you can't do that. It'll be illegal." And they were like, "We're gonna do it, and you're gonna
Yep.
defend us." And we were like, "Out. We're out."
Oh my gosh. Like, okay,
And
bye.
I was like,
You're
"My law firm
withdrawing.
has at least a little bit of ethics." Uh, Yay, ethics.
That's funny. But it is nice. That is a nice part of the episode, is getting to see a little bit more of Wolfram and Hart.
Yeah.
Like, I
I'm
am very excited.
I can't wait to get more Wolfram and Hart, and there's so much more Wolfram and Hart coming. Like
Mhm.
so much. Last week, Becky said she wants me to join a demon law firm so she can learn about it.
Oh my gosh, just for like research purposes. I
Yeah,
just
I was
want
like,
to
I could be
know.
like undercover. Yeah.
Oh gosh. It's so funny.
All right. With that, let's move on to not pop culture references.
Yeah, some more pop than others. fun. And of course, first up, when Cordelia is going through and listing possible calamities that could be happening when Angel approaches her, and she says Jar Jar getting his own talk show, which is an allusion to poor Jar Jar Binks, a very unpopular character introduced in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I will never forget the Jar Jar hate during that
Oh my
time.
god. But well deserved, because
It
he
was
was
so
A,
annoying.
annoying, B, racist.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. So racist.
like, so the Jar Jar hate is one of the few times where I'm like, yeah, that's deserved hate.
Yep.
Like, fans, make your voices heard.
Like, that was a terrible choice.
A
Oh,
horrible character.
goodness.
Cordelia says to Angel after he starts acting sensitive, "Hey, what's your damage?" A clear reference to the 1988 cult classic film Heathers, which we covered on
Woohoo!
this podcast a couple years ago. So go look for that, because
That was fun.
everyone should watch that movie at some point in their life.
When Angel invites Kate into his office, Cordelia mutters Mr. and Mrs. Spock need to mind meld now, which is a reference to the infamous Star Trek character. I do like how she also makes a reference to Xander right after that. She's like, been spending too much time with Xander.
Oh, that's funny.
It's
I didn't catch that.
cute.
That's
It's
cute.
like
Yeah.
muttering. It's like, aw.
Before all the Star Trek reboots and stuff, Next Generation was on the air, but like knowing about Spock wasn't cool again yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Which it's funny because what's his name? How did I already forget his name? Wolfram and Hart.
Lee
Lawyer in
Mercer?
this. Thank you. Lee Mercer kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Dark Sheldon type
Yeah.
character, which makes me think of Spock almost every time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, there's definitely
Spock's
some Sheldon stuff there. And I was like, God, he's so inspired by Sheldon. And then I had to remind
yeah,
myself that this was first.
pre-Sheldon.
Pre-Sheldon. Little Tony's attorneys says to Kate, "It means we'll shine a light in the darkest corners of this precinct and give the people a view of the brutality and callousness of this police force that will make Mark Furman look like Gentle Ben." This is a reference to the infamous detective Mark Furman in the O.J. Simpson murder trial, whose racist remarks became a large focus of the trial of the century, to the point where he was accused of planting evidence. Gentle Ben is a kind fictional bear created by author Walt Morey, first introduced in the children's novel in 1965 called Gentle Ben, that told the story of the friendship between a large male bear named Ben and a boy named Mark. It later was the basis for the 1967 film Gentle Giant and multiple TV series. I think there was a Michael Landon version.
That sounds right. That is a deep cut reference. Having to know what Gentle Ben is and who Mark Furman is.
It's
to
a
get
weird
the
combination.
full impact. It is. I was like, okay. Like, and oh well. But yeah, they knew it was the 90s. They knew what they were talking about if they could make a Mark Furman reference.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. And then Spivey, Little Tony's accomplice, mentions the planet Mongo, which is a reference to the fictional planet in the Flash Gordon comic strips.
I would not have caught that.
Me neither.
The title of the episode is a reference to the 1811 Jane Austen novel Sense and Sensibility, which follows the three Dashwood sisters and their widowed mother as they are forced to leave the family estate in Sussex and move to a modest cottage on the property of a distant relative in Devon. Oh, the horrors. There the two eldest girls experience love and heartbreak that tries the contrasting characters of both. I have not read this book, nor have I seen the movie. I am not a big fan of Pride and Prejudice, and I couldn't get through Emma, so I just never even bothered with Sense and Sensibility.
Emma's kind of insufferable. If I would think if I had to guess out of which of the Jane Austen novels you would enjoy the most, it would be Sense and Sensibility. But maybe that time has passed. Oh gosh. And in the episode, Kate says, "God, listen to me. Suddenly I'm Dr. Laura." And Dr. Laura is a reference to Laura I can't do it. Schlesinger? That's hard to
close.
say. Yeah. From New York, an author who hosted a nationally syndicated radio program on which she tries to solve listeners' emotional problems.
Can you imagine listening to a radio program now? Like, It would be
Oh
on
gosh.
Sirius
Yeah,
XM now, or it would be a podcast.
that would be crazy. Reminds me of Sleepless in Seattle, kind of too.
Yeah, a little
Different
bit.
time. Different time.
We've got a little bit of trivia as well. Tim Minier says his original idea for the episode was of cops who become so sensitive that they are unable to perform their jobs. But after discussing the idea with creator JW, it became something far more interesting than what I had originally pitched. Instead of just super sensitive cops, you have people whose emotions are completely on the surface. I don't understand how that's different.
No, I don't. That's why I was like, what were you guys trying to do with this episode? Like, this does
I
not
think,
clear it up at all.
yeah, this is not the best. Well, we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Oh man. And then in the final scene in which Kate and her father meet up, Manier originally wrote this as kind of a big TV ending where they hug, and JW suggested that instead Kate's father acts as though nothing has changed, which was brutal to watch. And Manier said that if it had gone the other way, I think the whole thing would have collapsed. That's really JW knowing best. And I don't know if I have ever disagreed more with the head writer of an episode, because I think that actually would have made the episode more poignant.
I
If
don't know. I think it is kind of an interesting choice to have him. I mean, the things that he said were memorable and stand out.
that
I
is
think if
true,
they had
because I
hugged, it would have been a
cursed
little
at
bit
my
too
TV.
cute. Yeah.
Yeah, but gosh, I got so mad at that
The
guy.
problem is that the episode falls apart in other ways. I
That's
don't think
true.
the ending is the problem.
That solid
uh,
point.
Writer Tim Minier regrets the actor they cast in the role of mobster Little Tony, saying, although John Capodice was very good, the character was cliched, a Sopranos knockoff. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. But I mean, I thought he did a good job. He is definitely what I would think of as a stereotypical mobster.
I mean,
Um,
he did look like he walked off the set of Sopranos into
that's
this
true.
episode. I mean,
Oh gosh. And then Alex Scooby, I think that might be how you say that, who portrays Harlan in this episode. Harlan is the one who confesses his love to Kate.
oh,
There
okay,
you go.
yep.
Not Heath. Okay. So he also portrayed Vincent in Bad Girls on Buffy, and he was the leading vampire minion for the demon Balthazar in that episode. So we
I
have
can
seen him,
completely picture him as a vampire now. Like, I'm like,
right?
oh yeah, that's the same guy.
It's so funny how I like how they use a lot of the same actors on both shows. It's kind of fun to spot
Yeah.
them.
Just put different bumpies on their forehead. New character.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this might be an interesting version of this section of the podcast.
Hmm.
Does it still slay?
I think this might be my first no. I have no desire to watch this episode again. I think it holds up terribly. I think it was tone deaf when it originally aired, and it's 10 times more tone deaf now. So I'm going to go with no.
I
It does
agree with you.
not.
I'm going to go with no. It has a couple of moments of greatness, but not enough to outbalance the problems. And if I were, talking to someone who wanted to watch the series for the first time, this is an episode I would tell them to skip. Be like, you
Yeah.
don't need that one.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
Like,
it.
just read a synopsis. You'll find out a little bit more about Kate's dynamic with her dad, but we'll see that in the
It's
future
also,
too.
you don't need, it's like, I imagine that there's a lot of people who could have seen the first few episodes of the series and been like, I could write Kate's story with her dad. And like, it would
Yeah.
come out kind of the same. Um,
It's true.
and,
Oh.
the moments of David Boreanaz being silly are great, but there's going to be more of that in future episodes of Angel. So, this episode's
Yeah.
just, it could fall by the wayside.
Yeah. I am curious to hear from listeners who really enjoy this episode. Um I'd love I'd love hearing different perspectives. I would like to know if others who watched it, if the police brutality aspect registered, cuz I could see online when I was looking up different points for this episode that there were a lot of people who really love it.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get past everything else, but I'm curious.
Well, that seems like a good segue for us to head over to the Bronze and hear from some of those listeners.
Bronze things. Things of bronze.
First up, we've got feedback from Coffee and Vodka, and he says, "Greetings, sublimely sensitive slayers." I like the alliteration there. That's fun. Easily the funniest and most emotionally vulnerable episode so far. The plotting and dialogue were great with a ton of pull quotes, as well as it supplied the other bookend to Buffy's Beer Bad episode with this episode's Emotion Bad. Oh, that's interesting. Elizabeth Rom's performance was fantastic with her speech at her father's retirement party, no doubt a season standout. Finally, I greatly enjoyed Cordelia and Angel's empathy routine with Doyle as the straight man in the middle. They make for a wonderfully functional, dysfunctional team. New shoes, magic words, and all. 4 umami creature features, daddy issues, and talking stick shticks out of 5. Peace and take care, Coffee and Vodka. That's interesting. I like looking at it as a kind of counterpart to Beer Bad. I think
does
Beer
make
Bad,
me hate it less.
Yeah, Beer Bad was, I think, more successful. But that's
But there's a lot of
interesting.
people who hate Beer Bad.
That's
So
true. I used to be one of them. I am a convert.
we also heard from Becky, who was on last week. Hi, friends. I honestly didn't remember this episode at all, so watching it now felt like seeing it for the first time, and it's not too shabby. I bet David had a blast filming such a light, loose version of Angel. His sensitivity curse made for some great moments with him, Kate, Cordy, and Doyle. I don't remember really caring for Kate's character during my original watch of the show, but I like her this time around. This episode makes her a more likable character. Sensitive Kate was great too, but I have to admit her deal with her dad hits too close to home, and I loathe how crappy he was to her at the end of the episode. Jerk.
Yeah.
Side notes. Cordy fussing about Angel being clueless while Doyle is being strangled right behind her by the green goo monster. Hilarious. I love Angel dressed in a Hawaiian shirt and that hat. Did the attorney for little Tony remind anyone else
Oh
of an evil Sheldon Cooper? Yes. Both of us.
Becky! Yes.
Yes. She's right
Oh
on the
my
same wavelength
gosh.
with us.
That's so funny.
Kate calling out Doyle and Cordy about their feelings for each other. Loved their reactions. Yeah, that was actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
Favorite quotes.
Bad double poly blend or something like that.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, look right at him. He's so into you. Yeah, that was pretty funny. Favorite quotes from Becky. Alan, what were your parents like? Angel, my parents were great. Tasted a lot like chicken. That is a weird line for Angel, not Angelus, to say.
Mm-hmm.
From Angelus, it would have been hilarious, actually.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
Yeah. Cop on the street to a lady who's been mugged. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that you're listening to your mugger's feelings at all. Bye for now. Grr.
That was funny.
We got a voicemail from Anwin who says, be a rainbow, not a painbow.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that line, but holy hell.
It's a fantastic line.
It's so absurd, but it's good. I like it. I need to
I
find
kind
a
of
way
want to put it on a t-shirt. Yeah.
Right? Like that would be a great tester on a sweatshirt or something for people to recognize out in the wild.
Hello, my lovelies. Just watched Sense and Sensitivity and really loved it. I just think the acting is awesome. Kate being all sensitive was hilarious. She did it in such a great way, and the acting in that scene in the bar where she's giving the speech was great. It was so emotional. And then she kind of played it over the top, but sort of like when people are drunk, but she didn't act drunk. It was just really cool, just really awesome to watch. And then Angel as well. I just think it's so refreshing. David Boreanaz is so great a comic actor. We don't get to see it very often, but I love in this show how every now and again some spooky woo-woo will come along and change him and he'll be all sensitive. And I just think it was really cool. It was so cute. Absolutely adorable when he's hugging Doyle and Cordelia. Loved it. The dialogue was great in this too. I just think it's really cool writing. And then I'd forgotten at the end, this is the cool thing about rewatching this show after so long is that I remember the general gist, but I forget a lot of things. And at the end, so heartbreaking when Kate's dad comes in and he's all sort of quiet and pensive, and you just think he's going to open up to her and apologise for a lifetime of heartbreak. And he basically shuts her right down and says it never happened. Oh my God, that's heartbreaking. That's so awful, and Angel saw it happen. Ugh. Anyway, don't be a painbow, be a rainbow. Bye.
You know, putting it that way, I do like how it subverts your expectations at the end of it. I will take that point. Even though
I think it's a
I
more
wanted
interesting
to
choice.
punch him in the face for
But
the way
see,
he reacted to her.
That's why I think it's a good
Yeah.
narrative choice,
It
because
made
it
me
elicited
care.
this very strong emotional reactions from all of us.
That's
Which
true.
is, if they had hugged and forgiven each other at the end, it would have been fine, but I don't think we'd be talking about that.
No.
Anwin, thank you for writing in. It's so interesting how much she liked the episode because, first of all, she's not from the US. I don't think they
True.
have a big police brutality problem in New Zealand, but I'll ask her that the next time I
Yeah.
talk to her.
If they do,
And
I am not aware of it.
yeah, and secondly, she's focused so much more on the character development and the relationship between Kate and Angel and his team. And those parts
Yeah.
of the episode did work for me. It was
Yeah.
just, for me, outweighed by all the problematic stuff. But
Yeah.
those parts of the episode are good. So, I don't disagree with you, and when I'm just focused differently, which is
Yeah.
normal.
I have a hard time not allowing anything that has to do with, personal experiences overshadowing it. Just so happens with like having been a prosecutor and married to someone in law enforcement and dealing with it firsthand. Like I can't overlook it. It
Yeah,
just it's at the forefront of my brain.
I'm the same way about, there are
Yeah.
certain things that I just can't look at lightly or treat as just entertainment because
Yeah.
they have more meaning.
I should say previously married to someone in law enforcement, for those who
Yes.
do not know me. That is no longer the case.
That's the end of the main section of the podcast. If you want to hear us talk spoilers, stay tuned for the Watcher's Diaries.
Woohoo! And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can find all of our contact information at podcastica.com and in the show notes for each episode.
And also at podcastica.com, you'll find links to our social media pages and all of our other shows. And Podcastica has so many shows, and it's a really busy time right now in the Podcastica universe because, going on right now are Yellow Jackets, White Lotus, Run for Your Lives is pretty much always going on. But starting soon, there's going to be Wheel of Time, Daredevil, and then in April we're having The Last of Us comes back and Handmaid's Tale comes back. So there is a ton of current material or future material coming from Podcastica, but there's also a huge backlog of fantastic coverage of other shows that you can go watch and enjoy now. And if you like Buffy and you have a stomach for violence, I really recommend Yellow Jackets.
Yes, it is so good. Like,
it's addictive.
It's absurdly good, and you guys do an excellent job covering it. I binge listened last week to y'all's season 2 coverage again, and it's such a fun show, and I honestly think it's just getting better and better. So if you have not given that a try yet, please do. Please do. And White Lotus has also been fun to listen to, the coverage so far this season. I think that is another one that I'm enjoying each episode this season more and more. So that's another
White
good
Lotus
one.
has been great this episode. And that podcast is so funny. They do such a good job on there. It's really great. And every time I listen to it, I'm like, oh, I don't remember that from the episode. There's always 5 major things that I missed.
Yep.
So
they catch
the
stuff.
podcast helps.
And of course, if you like what we do, please go ahead and give us a 5-star rating, a review, or a like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, we'll be covering Buffy Season 4, Episode 6, Wild at Heart. Thanks, everyone, and...
You've got pensive face.
I've always got pensive face.
Well, pensiver face.
Oh, such a cute one.
All right, that's the end of the non-spoiler section. So, as usual, if you want to avoid spoilers, now's the time to turn off your listening device or hit stop on your computer or however you're listening to us. Yell at your Alexa to stop, whatever it is. Okay, that was enough time for that. On to the Watcher's Diaries.
It's too bad we can't sneak a look at the Watcher Diaries and read up on Angel. I'm sure it's full of fun facts to know and tell.
Yeah, that's too bad. That stuff is private.
Also, Giles keeps them in his office, in his personal files.
Most importantly, it would be wrong.
And I don't have a ton to say about spoilery stuff, but I did want to say that we're going to get to see Lee Mercer get completely and utterly beat down by Faith. And
oh, yeah.
I'm not a fan of, beatings, but in his case, I'll make an exception because it's very satisfying.
It was very satisfying. As soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, yeah, that guy. Like, you're not going to have a good time. I only had 2 other spoilery points that I thought of. The first was how Kate's dad, kind of instantly clocks the sensitivity training or class as being suspect.
Yeah.
When Kate's giving her speech, he's like, what the hell did they do to her in that class? And, we find out later, quite a bit later, a few episodes later down the line, that he has been involved in this kind of demonic crime ring. And I'm wondering if that was even occurring at the time of this episode and if he could have known a little bit more with, sort of demonic forces involved in the LAPD than he let on. So that was one thing that popped into my head. And then we've got Wolfram and Hart kind of catching on to Angel and his existence, and we hear Mercer mention that they should take a more personal interest in him, and boy do they ever. So that kind of sets off this huge plot point for the rest of the series, and I am so excited for more Wolfram and Hart stuff. I can't wait till we meet other Wolfram and Hart characters, but it's so nice to see the show take steps towards what we know is to come.
Wolfram and Hart is this is the only lawyer show I like because the lawyers are evil and it just seems appropriate.
It's so good.
I know a lot of lawyers who are not evil. Kara is a good example. She's a lawyer who's not evil. I like to think of myself as having been a not evil lawyer, and I've worked with other not evil lawyers. But a lot of the things that are stereotypes about lawyers and lawyer jokes and the bad opinion that a lot of people have of lawyers, most of it warranted. There's a lot of lawyers who suck.
They're some really terrible people
or horrible people.
Yep. Or both, which is a terrible combination.
Yeah.
But it's satisfying to see the evil lawyers and have it reflect a lot of real life.
Yeah. There are moments in the series where Lila or Lindsay will say something and I'll be like, oh yeah, that happened to me once.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. Heard that before.
Like if you just remove the magic from that, that's a completely realistic situation.
Oh gosh, that's gonna be fun.
Are horrible places.
Especially big law.
Yeah, we should do like an episode where you and I just tell lawyer stories. Like you could tell prosecutor stories and I could tell corporate stories. And
that would be fun.
People can opt out of listening to it.
Some excellent stories to be told for sure.
Yeah. All right, that is the complete end of our show. We still managed to do almost 2 hours, so we are on track and on brand. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. And until next time, I'm Penny.
And I'm Kara. Keep slaying.